Everybody, I'm Hill Harper, and you're listening to Five-Factor Authentication, a podcast about our constantly evolving relationship with technology. Five-Factor is brought to you by Norton. Hey everybody, welcome to Five-Factor Authentication. I'm hoping that you're learning something through these different episodes. I'm so excited about my guest, and whether you've learned something from the last ones or not, I guarantee you're going to learn something from this one because he's one of the most intelligent, thoughtful people I know personally, and someone I have a great deal of respect for. He's also my friend, and so today's guest, my friend, co-founder, and one who has been dubbed the consumer brand whisperer before. I am thrilled to have Ari Bloom on the show. From his early days at Gap to launching A2B Ventures, where he advised startup founders across industries, leading the tech firm Avametric through exit, and now co-founding, really founding AFrame, and I'm a co-founder with it. Full disclosure, I'm a co-founder. So yes, this is some inside speak you're going to be privy to. Ari has not only transformed the way brands sell their products, but also how they solve problems and advocate for underrepresented communities. So Ari, thank you for joining me on this. First of all, let's jump in. You've had a lot of experience working with brands throughout your career, and from early days at Gap to advising companies like Equinox, NBC Universal, opening Wise Sons with your brother. One time you were giving me a tour in San Francisco, and we drove by Wise Sons, and this is obviously pre-pandemic. There was a line out the door down the street, and I was like, whoa. And then also co-founding your current company, AFrame. Since this podcast is all about tech, let's start there. Where did you first start seeing tech play an important role for brands?
Well, first, also let me just say thank you for the great introduction. I have a lot to live up to, so you can continue introducing me anytime, Hill.
Okay.
But thank you for being my friend and co-founder and partner and collaborator all these years, and it's great to be here with you.
Awesome.
As to your question on tech, I think tech has been something for me that has been omnipresent. I think I can't think of an experience that I've had that has not been influenced by tech in business. Now, I would say it's evolved to be more impactful and more important and also more recognized. I think part of the evolution of anything that's impacting an industry is generally it may start out impacting businesses in ways and industries in ways that the executives don't know yet, especially because a lot of it is generational. So I think tech has been influencing things as long as I've been working, but I think that there's been more of a recognition around how much that impacts business and the fact that every company is a tech company. I think that's probably a decade old at this point.
So, I mean, that's an amazing statement. Every company is a tech company. So if you're going to have, and you're saying if you're going to have a fully functioning business, whether it's a startup or whether it's full blown, you have to have some tech elements. Now, we're going to get into some of those things around AFrame in a second, but let's keep it general first. How should brand leaders think about technology that they're using and deploying, and how should companies be thinking about it? And in other words, you and I talk a lot about diversity. We talk about challenges. We talk about access, equity. Obviously, tech plays a role in that. How should we be thinking about it all? It feels like there's so many things to think about, and when it comes to technology, there's so many pitfalls and problems and potential biases. It's just like it can be somewhat overwhelming. So how can we start to, if someone's listening to this or watching this, how can they start to think about how, if they want to start a business or they already have a business, how to use technology in a responsible way, but also in a way that helps their business?
Inevitably, you're going to need to be educated on what technologies are going to help you to start and grow a business. And I think that's something that some people maybe either skip or don't. Those are questions you don't know necessarily to ask. And I think one of the most challenging things with any new business, especially if it's your first time starting a business or a business in a specific industry, is knowing the unknown unknowns. So I think let's take technology and categorize that now together for all the listeners into the known unknowns, just to say, this is something I need to think about and I need to explore. Now, I think that there are plenty of off-the-shelf technologies that are super helpful, that have a big impact on your business, and they can cover a lot of bases in the beginning. So,
for instance,
things as simple as QuickBooks. So QuickBooks for a small business can actually be a very useful tool, or similar software. QuickBooks is one of the kind of industry standards, we'll say, for smaller businesses. A lot of businesses start on it. And it's something that can help you scale from kind of small to medium size. And it's a really useful tool because it can manage your finances, your payroll, it can manage your inventory. There are various different modules of it. And there are other softwares out there. I'm not sponsored by QuickBooks, but it's a software I've used multiple times as I've started businesses. So that's a technology, and that's something that is, it's almost so ubiquitous at this point. It doesn't seem like a technology, but it is. And the fact that you can log on to it virtually, that you can access your financials and give logins to other people who you can work with, whether they're contractors or they're employees, that's a very valuable tool that you need to invest in early on. It's not a very expensive thing either. So having a financial system behind your business that might cost you 50 or $100 a month is a very important investment, because you also want to be really organized around how you set your business up and how you're tracking and managing your financials, because you have to think about filing taxes. You have to think about being able to present your information to investors. And you also have to know what's going on in your business. So that's a simple one. And it's something that if you're a first-time business owner, you may not know that that software and those systems are available and how they can scale up as your business grows. Even the difference between a system that you have to use on a computer, like a desktop that's downloaded, versus something that's a virtual system, which is a much more flexible and easier system, it just maybe not have all the features that you would get if it was like a downloaded version. So those are like, that's just like gateway product for you as you're starting a business. And that's a very mundane, simple tech, but it's important. It's a really important one. Then if you're thinking about things like selling online, there are various different platforms that you can utilize to start your business and to essentially present it to the world and sell. Sometimes that's selling products, sometimes that's selling services. So whether you need e-commerce, there are different platforms that you can look into. There's platforms like Shopify that are kind of the gold standard for a lot of small businesses and very easy to set up. But I think that those are the other systems that I think a lot of businesses, if you've never done it before, you wouldn't know where to look or how to start. And so I think that just thinking about what is your business, what are you hoping to achieve, and also know that there are questions you're not going to know to ask. And so having real people, not virtual, not tech resources that you can go to and say, what did you do and what are the things you wish you'd known the first time you started your business?
Having your own personal board of directors, right? You need to have a circle of folks that can help you navigate and make decisions and like you said, help you know what you don't even know that you need to know. But you just mentioned something. I want to drill down a little bit on it. You just talked about shopping and sales, direct to consumer. A lot of people out there oftentimes talk about social media from a sales point of view. And a lot of insiders I know basically say people think that there's this sale-through aspect to social media, like, oh, I'm going to start a business. I can get it, talk about it on Instagram, and I'm going to sell product. It seems that folks think that social media may have more power or less power. There's a debate about how much power does it have. You have your current business, and I don't want to skip forward, but it's just right here now. We just got to talk about it just for a second. Your current business, AFrame Brands, is a celebrity-led brand company, which where you're partners with celebrities for owners. But before we even talk about that, talk about the perception of social media for selling and starting a business, and how people may be either thinking about it the wrong way, or do they think about it the right way? It's the essential tool, or is it overblown, or how do you think about it?
I wouldn't call it the essential tool. I think there is no such thing. Frankly, I think that if I could deliver any message to anybody that wants to sell anything, it's that you have to have multiple channels and strategies to sell in different ways. And I came up in the retail business. I was a merchandiser, which is an old-fashioned way of saying brand manager.
That was for Gap, right?
That was for Gap. Yeah. So physical stores. And, I've long believed that retail is always going to be relevant, because in a lot of cases, people need to touch, feel, experience things. But I don't believe that in a mono-channel strategy at all. I don't believe in only retail. I don't believe in only e-commerce, and I don't believe in only social. I think that it's really important that you figure out how to have a multi-channel approach. And then it may be based on whatever business you're building that one of them is, the most productive, or it becomes the bulk of your sales, but it's going to be hard to kind of give up the others. It just may be that you do them in order, or you do certain amounts of focus on certain channels first. But I think you have to be open to experimenting, and you have to read the results and figure out what's working. I think there are plenty of businesses that can drive a lot of traffic and sales via social, but I would say there's not that many of them. I like to use the analogy in many different conversations of pro athletes or professional actors and entertainers such as yourself who have been incredibly successful. I think we tend to glorify everybody who's like the tippy top and the 0.001%, and not think about the fact that there are a lot of people who make it into the league, are starting five, maybe all stars. Like, it's a very competitive place, and we have to remember that success isn't just about selling your company for $1 billion. Success can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and I think also defining what success means to you and what you're looking to achieve is important, and not setting unreasonable standards for what success is, because those are few and far between. We hear about them the most because they're the ones that get talked about, but there are lots of people who are very successful and very happy building things that are not $1 billion exits. And so, like, I think that the standard of success is an important thing also, which will help you, again, work backwards. When I was consulting, when I did A2B Ventures, I had a philosophy of meeting people and saying, let's start with the destination and then work backwards. And I think that's always been a philosophy that's worked well for new businesses, because it at least gets you aligned on what's your goal, what are you trying to achieve here, what does success look like, and then how do you work backwards to figure out what are the steps today that you need to take to get there. And you reevaluate that every 3 to 6 months to make sure that those steps still make sense. But knowing what you're trying to achieve first, what's the problem you're solving, as we say at AFrame, and something I learned in tech. So, in the spirit of talking about tech and how it's influencing things, when I came up in fashion, what we did was we would say, okay, we had a great sweater last year, and we need to what's called comp that, meaning we need to exceed the sales from last year. So comp sales always refer to what's the last year's sale, and you want to meet or exceed that. And we generally were just designing incrementally better, what we thought at least was better product. And that was the strategy. It was just build better product every season. And, some companies are very successful at doing that. It's hard to do that, but it can work, especially if you have 1,000 stores or you've got distribution or a great brand. But I think when you're starting a new business, what I learned in tech was how to start with the problem first and work backwards. So even what I was doing in consulting was really just, what's your goal? I think what I reframed when I learned in tech was like, what's the problem that needs to be solved? And that really helped to influence what we've done at AFrame together, which is, what are the problems that exist out there that you can uniquely solve? And that, I think, makes your brand a lot more indispensable, because if you can find something that's not being solved for enough people out there and deliver them a great solution to that problem, that is a very strong strategy and strong recipe for success. And that's something that came from tech.
I think that that's great. And before we jump to sort of a deeper dive dig into AFrame, which I really want to do, because I think that there's some really interesting things that we can talk about there, I want to go talk about Avometric. And so there's no doubt that technology is a defining feature of the brand landscape today. And at Avometric, what you did was you helped brands navigate the virtualization of retail with 3D content creation and other augmented reality technology. So that's using the newest technology to say, hey, you just said that you think people still want to touch the shirt, try it on, and so there's a reason for that. But then also people want quick, very frictionless experiences, but have confidence that it fits right or it looks good on me. So could you tell us more about the use of whether it's 3D content, augmented reality, and how it shapes interacting with brands, and where you think everything is headed in that regard? Like, where I assume we're just scratching the surface of this type of interaction. Where are we going with it, and how can anyone who's listening or watching this start to think about themselves in, how can they start thinking ahead rather than thinking always playing catch up?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I could frame Avometric as being ahead of its time, but I will tell you, for 20 years, people have been talking about, ever since the advent of e-commerce, how do you create a more lifelike experience online? Because especially in apparel, there's a very high return rate. It's 30 to 50%, depending on which product category it is. And that's very expensive for both brands and customers. And so the notion of Avometric when I joined was that there was a incredibly advanced technology that team had been building. I came in as a CEO after the brand or the company had been around for, I think, 3 years at that point. So I came in to help them to refine the business model and to develop a revenue model.
So you're talking about basically, ostensibly, a Silicon Valley or San Francisco-based tech company that hired you to be the new CEO, not because you're a technologist, but because you would help them refine the business. So you may have a great piece of technology, but unless you actually refine the business, ultimately, it may not work, right?
That's a great point. In fact, they had raised a lot of capital from the best, VCs arguably in the Valley, based on the concept and the technology. But I think after that technology was refined and developed, the business model needed to be developed in order to monetize it. And the notion going in of a technology and what impact it might have, especially for folks, I find that a lot of technical folks have ideas around how consumers interact with things. And if you don't have a lot of experience selling to consumers, those ideas may not actually connect with how consumers want to buy or interact with things. And so I think for me, the reason I got recruited to that company was because I was somebody at that point who had done retail and commerce, but also had some tech experience as well. So I had, previous to that, I was the head of marketing and communications for Enjoy, which was a tech-based platform that launched in 2014 or 2015. And so I was probably one of the unique people out there who had both industry domain expertise, but also had, worked in a tech company. And so I think I had a unique skill set. But, when I started, it was myself, one other business person, and then about 25 engineers. And so I'd never managed engineers before, which was a really good experience for me. But yeah, I was brought in to essentially say, how do we monetize this? And so what we did was we thought about, like, if you've got this great technology, the initial concept was let's have a standalone website. People can come there and they can virtually try on products and we'll sell it to them directly. And that's in concept, a really good idea, but in practice, getting enough traffic to a site that nobody's heard of before, to virtually try on product that's actually not yours, that you're going to be selling from third parties, there's a lot of logistics and money behind how to actually achieve that. And what I looked at there is I said, okay, so as an industry expert, how is this technology going to be useful for both companies and for consumers? And I bifurcated the strategy to say, because I knew as a merchant that one of the biggest pain points was the development of product, development of apparel. And because it requires multiple fittings, it requires multiple samples, and those samples get sent back and forth between factory and headquarters. And usually those factories are on different continents. And so the cost and time lag there is a pain point. And so the first thing I asked was, can we use this technology to help streamline the fitting and development process? And the answer was yes. So there's a benefit for companies right there to streamline. At the same time, because they were starting to use the technology to actually develop their products, all of the information was going into the system, so to speak. So we had virtualized the products and the development process. At that point, we then had the ability to take that information and those images and use them on the consumer-facing website. But instead of trying to develop our own website, we implemented what's called an API so that we could have that technology exist on the retailer's website themselves. So they would be able to virtualize the product through the fitting and development process, which sped up a process which is about 6 to 12 months, depending on the brand, usually. Cut that process down and then utilize those files to help sell better. And so that became the strategy, was to develop an ecosystem essentially for use of the technology. And eventually we partnered with Gerber Technology, who's one of the largest CAD software companies that works with the apparel industry, so that they could utilize the 3D technology for the product development. And then we partnered with Gap and some other companies and Taylor to put the technology on their website. And then we eventually sold to Gerber. And that was a very unique and amazing and tiring experience. All of those things rolled into one. It was similar to having a child.
As you know, tech has already altered our society. And so let's talk about societal change and technology. In an earlier episode of 5-Factor Authentication, I had an amazing conversation with Chris Krebs, who was in the Trump administration around cybersecurity, and basically made the comment he was ultimately fired because he certified the election results, saying that these election results were. And we talked about this idea of how technology is actually having an impact on democracy, on society. And I know you and I have had conversations before talking about how technology and the way you can build a business can impact impact equity. So many people are demanding more from tech companies, especially to be more representative, diverse, ethical. How are you seeing companies respond to this demand, and how is tech a part of that response? And moreover, how are you building a company like AFrame in that ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, something I think about a lot in the context of what I did before AFrame and what I'm doing now, which in many ways is the reaction to everything else I experienced. A couple points I want to make. One is technology is it's almost like it's a fine line you have to walk to make technology both societally beneficial and profit driven in a way that's going to essentially, it innovates, it generates wealth, and it helps society. Those three things are hard to do all at once. And I think that the motivation to generate wealth is the thing that kind of overwhelms everything.
And I'll add power, wealth and power to that, right? It's because there's a power in information and the ability to disseminate. So wealth and power.
For sure. Agreed. Those two things often go hand in hand. One or the other they can go back and forth. I think that the thing that I think about, like, internet's an easy one to point to, and social media, certainly think about Facebook. But I would go back even to like radio and TV. Like, those are technologies that were disruptive, and how they were utilized to communicate, telephone, even, like, to bring people together. We've seen this film over and over again. I think that because we live in an era when the internet was created and flourished, and social media was created and flourished, that's our focus. But this has happened before. And so those technologies can be used in ways that are positive, and a lot of times that requires some regulation. Or they can be used in a way that is disruptive in a negative way. They can be used to spread propaganda and mistruths. And so I think that with responsibility, or with power, comes great responsibility. And I think that's the part that we sometimes miss in developing technologies. It's really about the money and the power, and it's not about how this actually, the externalities. When we were in economics, I'm sure you remember this from college when we were studying economics, we talk about this concept of externalities. And I think it's something we don't talk about after we get out of school. I think it's like this like theoretical concept for like the economics textbook, but we don't think about it in our businesses. And I think that's a mistake. We don't capture the cost of the externalities of the businesses and the things that we build. And I think with AFrame, we wanted to make sure that we were thinking about externalities.
So who is responsible for capturing those costs then, Ari? Who should it be? Should it be society or the public that demands, for instance, companies to change or to be, quote unquote, more ethical or more responsible, environmentally responsible, more diverse? Or is it the leadership that should be making those decisions because it's the right thing to do? Or is it the governments that should be regulating to make sure there's diversity, non-discrimination, access, et cetera? Or is it an all of the above thing?
Short answer is it's all of the above, but I think that the main motivation is always with the people that are building. So I firmly believe that commerce has a unique ability to make societal change, especially when you can align incentives around wealth creation, not power necessarily, but wealth creation and benefit to society. Like, if you can align those things, then that's the win-win. The problem is not everybody thinks that way. And I don't think it's intentional for a lot of people. I think people just don't know to think that way. A lot of folks, I'll go back to tech. A lot of people get really wealthy and powerful when they're very young and don't have the life experience. You're putting a lot of power in hands of people who may not have bad intentions, but they just don't know any better. So in that case, I think it does require either some regulation, or it requires, let's put some responsibility back on the VCs and the private equity firms that invest and give the capital to allow these companies to grow. We don't necessarily see that there are controls and ethics all the way through the system. And that's, it's a big word to describe this. But I think that there are actors in here that could take more responsibility. And I would say that the money is a really big constituent. And luckily, we are seeing some firms that are focused more on equity. But I don't think it's enough, and I don't think it motivates the investments. I think ultimately they're looking to return money to their investors, and it's back to the conversation around public equities too. Like, who is the constituent that we need to be working for? Is it the shareholders? Because the companies have that written in their business plans, their operating agreements. Like they have to, their fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder return. And so what are the constituents, as we've talked about, I think in pop culture for the last couple of years? What about the community? And that goes back to the externalities, because I think the externalities sometimes are amorphous, and they are often felt months to years after the actions are taken. So if Facebook is a good example of what they did in 2012 impacting what happened in 2016, those externalities are felt later. Pollution, how much can we say about people developing cancer 5 to 10 years later from pollution or radioactivity or whatever it is that's a byproduct of an industrial park? When it's not a direct thing that's happening to you immediately as a result of something, like you can say if food is contaminated and you get sick, there's a direct correlation that is within hours of that product being consumed. A lot of externalities aren't felt right away, or they're felt generations later, but they're there. And I think that's the tough part.
That's a brilliant point about the fact that you can also flip it for positive externalities, right? That sometimes aren't felt immediate, but are felt generations later, like reducing the racial wealth gap, like climate, and doing things now to help the climate that may not be felt next year, next month, or whenever, but in the future. So let's talk about the positive side, and with AFrame, what I know what you've been really intentional about is building a company that is top to bottom doing things what I would say the right way, meaning the products that are put out and the ingredients in the products, as well as the packaging of the products, done sustainably and correctly. The people that represent, or the owners of the businesses, the investors in those businesses, being diverse and representing the community that the business, and also looking at the whole so-called underrepresented communities, or historically underrepresented communities, as a wonderful opportunity to provide real quality products to, along with hiring, diversity. Talk about some of your numbers. Talk about some of the successes, and where you're at, and why you think people are starting to pay attention to AFrame Brands from the standpoint of, hey, we didn't know we could build a company like that. How are you building something that looks like that? I've heard you talk about it before. I'd love for you to break it down and give us some numbers, give us some sense, a peer into what you've already built and where it's headed.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was a conversation with you early on, thinking about how we as parents are reflecting what our children are living in accurately in the things that we build, and the privilege that we have to actually do those things and to change a paradigm simply by leading by example. And so while it was easy to identify in the market that there were opportunities that were driven by changing demographics, that was a no-brainer. That's a simple. It was, you remember this, a couple of years ago, being able to look at birth rates in the United States and say over 50% of the babies born in the US since 2015 have a Black, brown, or Asian parent. That the majority of kids are now defined as kids of color in this country, and there are a majority of kids under 7 at this point. We see the opportunity in being able to deliver a product that's specifically formulated for half the population that's being underserved. It's not just about putting their face on marketing or packaging. That to me was the easy opportunity, the easy problem that needed to be solved. You can find that by Google searching. The bigger issue was then when we talked about how do you actually represent that community in the company that's delivering the products, which is it's a no-brainer, but it's the conventional wisdom is that's impossible. It's hard. How could you ever build a company that's a majority diverse? To me, that was actually a very welcome challenge, and we did it with no real stress, I'll say. Right now, we have a team of 30 across our holding company plus our brands, and we are 95% diverse, and we're 90% women of color on the team. It wasn't hard. It was intentional. We have an amazing COO, Avantha Arachi, who is, I would say, a trailblazer in how this is done. It requires more care. It requires some change in process. And there's some things that aren't comfortable for people.
Having Avantha as a guest on this show is going to be important in the future. She said something in a meeting where we both were in, where she was talking about biases that many of us may not even realize. And this actually relates to tech, right? Oftentimes job descriptions are put out, and for certain communities and certain folks who historically may not feel subconsciously that they deserve a promotion or that they're even be considered for a promotion, they ultimately don't apply. So that reduces the diversity of your pool when you put that out as a general offering over the multiple job services that are online. Rather than if you go recruit somebody, it makes them feel, oh, I can do this job. And all of a sudden, they're recruiting me to be a senior vice president where I would never apply to be a senior vice president, but they're recruiting me to be that role. I must belong. It must be okay. And to me, that's an incredibly powerful notion of the difference of using technology, of figuring out who's out there in the world that may be qualified to do this position, and then going at recruiting versus just putting out a job posting and saying, whoever shows up or is the hiring pool. That blew my mind because I never even thought about it in that way, and how tech could be used to actually access different people by engaging with them in a completely different way, right?
Yeah, I think that it's, she refers to this as active recruiting. And I think it's the difference in just being reactive about who comes to you versus going out and seeking people that you see potential in. And that's a very different paradigm. And that helps. That's how you break that cycle. It was a great point when she first made it to me. It was the same thing. I never thought about it that way, and she pointed out, and I said, I understand that. People self-bias themselves actually, and that is to the detriment of the companies because you don't get the best people, and so you don't want to provide too much information for people to essentially self-select out because they don't think they deserve that, and that is because of systemic biases that have led them to believe they don't deserve that, even if that may not be true. So, but at the same time, you have to find that balance of still providing information to make sure that people know you're hiring and the jobs, because there are people that will not self-select themselves out and you may not meet them otherwise. So I think we as a company are also trying to find that right balance, which is, that's a great problem to have. I want that problem. That's first class problem. But that's something we're working through right now is how do we create a process, since we're growing so much and we're now bigger and we need subject matter expertise. How do we create a process where we're getting the best people? And that's through a combination of providing information to anybody so they can see where we have opportunities, but also then actively still recruiting. And I think you can do both. It's more labor intensive to do active recruiting, obviously. So it also let's be honest, it relies on people having, their profiles available. So you put yourself on LinkedIn or some other platform and you know how to write your background and your resume, and one of our advisors that we work with, who's an amazing guy, Chip Sullivan, who's at NBC Universal, talks about just he works with a lot of foster kids, and he works with a lot of kids who are homeless who don't even have internet access, right? That they just don't know how to write a resume or don't know how to post it or where it's supposed to go. So how do you get into the job market if you systemically, essentially, you've not had access to these basic skills that are going to be required for you to actually get a job.
And now, a message from LifeLock.
No one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses, but LifeLock by Norton makes it easy to help protect yourself. So call 1-800-LifeLock or go to LifeLock.com and use promo code 5Factor. That's LifeLock.com, promo code 5Factor to save 25%. Protect yourself with LifeLock.
And now, back to 5-factor authentication with Hill Harper.
So the individual puts themselves out there online, and as tech advances, our digital vulnerabilities do too, right? What kind of conversations are you having with brands you work with about security and privacy, and how do you think about it as far as you're concerned? And then how should anybody who's listening to this or watching it think about themselves as far as their security and privacy? Because some people are like, man, they want me to put all my information out there. I don't want anybody to know all that, How can we think about protecting ourselves but still putting ourselves out there for opportunity but not get hit with the downside and the vulnerability around privacy, protection, cyber safety, security, et cetera?
Yeah, I think, look, there's an important distinction for people right now between what's personal and professional. And I think just as a start, thinking about what is your personal information and what is your professional information. Personal information can be your Instagram or TikTok, whatever else is not professional. Sometimes people use those for professional purposes. But even if you do, like having distinct accounts that are personal versus professional, I think that's a really important thing, because people share a lot of information when they think it's personal. And if it's not a private account, that information is out there forever. So I would really try to be careful about having a distinction between what's personal and professional. And so if you're a professional who is maybe not in a public facing role, and you don't have the need for a public facing Instagram or TikTok account, and keeping that private, keeping your Instagram account private, invite only, like that can help be the distinction where
But
that's
that
where you put
cuts
your
down
personal
people
information. But like
crawling
in
into
LinkedIn,
your DMs. I mean, why would you do that? You got to, how are people going to find you? I'm playing. You're looking at me like, you're like, Hill, I'm married. I have 2 kids. I don't want people crawling into my DMs. Or maybe you do. I don't know.
that's not where you want people to find you. I think generally, like if you're thinking about the distinction between personal and professional, there are platforms that are dedicated to professional interactions. And not to say that everybody uses them for that. Like there's definitely some not so great stuff going on LinkedIn. But I would say the majority of the people that are there, they're there to network and to find new opportunities and to find new candidates. So I think you put your professional attention into the professional platforms and your personal attention to the personal platforms, unless there's some reason why you need a public facing social media account. And again, you can have one that's for public consumption and
Right.
one that's for
right. Do you think that most people and brands are sufficiently aware of safety and privacy concerns, and do you think they're doing enough to protect themselves, or do you think that they should think about it more and do more, or do you just throw your hands up and say, privacy's out the window? If you're going to interact in this space, it's all bets are off.
I think everybody's aware of privacy issues. The problem is I don't think people know what to do about it, and I'm including the companies. So there's your baseline legal requirements that if you have lawyers, they'll tell you have to do around privacy policies, security, insurance policies, things like that. But you can't protect for everything. It's impossible.
So what do you think? What do you think is the number one threat, cyber threat facing Americans today? What would you, if you were just going to boil it down to one, what would you say it is?
Probably identity theft. I still think that's happening all over the place. I think it's getting easier. And then I would include in that not just financial theft around identity, but also posing as somebody else to scam somebody or them. I think there's a lot of account hacking, and so people posing as somebody that and then it's happened to me multiple times.
And even businesses are, there are 4 the Black Wall Street, Black Cash Matters accounts on Instagram where people are DMing people as if it's my company's account. And they're, I don't know what they're doing, because obviously they're not my account, and you could report them and try to stop them and block them. But there's a big lag time between those platforms actually knowing the person who's trying to report and block, is that the right person we're supposed to listen to, versus the person, because they have to figure that out before they shut down an account, right? Because it could be catastrophic if you shut down the wrong account, which is actually the legitimate account. So, to your point, that happens on the individual level as well as the business level. I'm sure with some of the AFrame celebrities, they have to be very aware of that as well.
Yeah, they have. I would say mostly they'll have teams working with them on some of the day-to-day management of things. So yeah, I think if you for the celebrities who are listening who have social media accounts, I think it's important to make sure that you have the right folks assisting you. Yeah, it's a slippery slope. It can be really powerful, but it can also be very dangerous. So you have to use common sense. I mean, just as a start. And I think that maybe we don't always do that when we're using social media. And thinking about, like, even for you and I as parents, how do we communicate that to our children who are starting to get into social media now? Our kids are still adolescents, both of ours, but they're starting to engage in tech and with their own devices, and they have access to social media, whether if it's not their own account, their friends. And so you have to, I think, use a lot of common sense, and also you have to be very not assertive, you have to be very communicative about what's out there and what they're going to see and what's real and what's not, and how to know what what might be somebody that's not who they say they are, and how to make sure that they're bringing that to a parent or a teacher. So those things are really important. It just goes back to kind of active management, whether that's active management as a parent or it is active management as a business person. You cannot sit and wait for things. You cannot be reactive. We're going back to the conversation we had earlier. You have to be proactive about everything and know that there's some things you're not going to know. And if you surround yourself with people who've been through this before, it does help because you can ask questions, but there's always corners you're not going to know to see around. And I mean, one of the things that I always find so funny is, we both have advanced degrees from Harvard, and you would assume that like having a Harvard MBA, I can go out and like start a business and know everything and know every question I need to ask. And I'm still learning stuff. And when I came out of business school, I was smarter than when I went in, and I was more confident, but I didn't know everything. And I had to start businesses to understand things, and I had to go through it once. It's impossible to learn everything before you do it. It just is.
I got you for just a few more minutes, so we're gonna keep this last section tight. But I got a couple things I want to get in before we finish. Number one, I want to start looking at the future. We've already covered a lot of ground. We're truly at the beginning of the relationship between technology and brands, and how do we think, or how do you think brands' tech usage will evolve? Okay, what can we expect next, and what do you think are the leading challenges over the next 10 years? And how tech can play a role in solving them. I know those are big macro questions, but it's literally about tech and brands and the future. Where are we headed? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that's going to disrupt business in the next couple of years is really crypto. I think virtual currency to me is one of the things that it's like a lot of tech in the early days. It's still a bit of a wild west. I think there's a lot of refining to do. There's a lot of scam artists out there still, but it's inevitable. Just like if you ask somebody 25 years ago about the internet and business, that it's coming and it's going to be changing the way that people interact with brands and products and services. So I think for all of us to think about is like, how are we interacting with virtual currency? What is that going to look like? Where does it evolve to? Where are the safe partners to work with? And how are we using it for good? Because I think we're going to get right back into this conversation again with crypto. We're going to be in the exact same place, which is like powerful technology. People are using it, and it can be really dangerous, and it can be disruptive, and it can cause a lot of financial ruin for people. Or it can be very positive, and it can help businesses work better. It can help people interact. It can create more safety around financial management. So to me, that's the big one to keep our eyes on. And we're at the beginning of this experiment. We're still in the early innings. So all these things we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, we should be thinking about now. And I say we, meaning everybody. But that is to me, that's the big one that's out there right now. That is the inevitable freight train coming at all of us.
Before I ask you this closer about 5 things that are most important factors of living a life, I'll let your subconscious start thinking about those 5 things. I want you to please break down to us the current brands that are on AFrame, what they are, who are the owners, and why they exist. Because I think what you're building with AFrame is incredible, but people need to know what these brands are, where they can find them, and how they can support AFrame Brands.
Yeah, thanks. One other thing I want to add before I get into that on the other technology that's coming is the metaverse, whatever we're going to call it. That the virtualization of interaction is coming too. So that is long in the making, and it's coming. And same rules apply. How do we create a force for good with that versus what could be very disruptive in a bad way? So that's
well, I just can't let you just say that. Hold on, I got to dig deep.
I don't want to look back on this in 5 years.
I'm going to dig deep on that. So let's talk about the brand piece of the metaverse then. If you're going to be a virtual person walking into a virtual store and be able to have a virtual showroom of products and goods, how should brands be thinking about positioning themselves for that new virtual world? If that's what's really coming, then how do I think about, how am I going to exist in the metaverse as a business?
Yeah, I think it's funny because back to the conversation about Avometric being ahead of its time, those were questions we were thinking about already, is how do you create a virtual environment, whether that's through AR, VR, and that's essentially what we're talking about with metaverse. I think the big established brands really have to think about listening a little bit more. I think they're generally used to telling people what's what and what's next. And I think where they tend to die is when they stop listening and they stop hiring, younger folks who have a different perspective on things. I think that's really important. Like we have too many leaders who are too old, frankly, like just to boil it down. Our boards are full of people who are over 50 or 60. Our executives are all in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Like we need to figure out how to integrate younger folks, the next generation, into executive decision making. I'm not saying give a 22-year-old a CEO title day one, but I do think that we need to do a better job of integrating people from different perspectives. It goes back to diversity generally. I think age is powerful diversity. I think we talk about why diversity is good business. It's not just about the color of your skin or your gender identity or your sexual orientation. Age is a big factor too of diversity. And if you think about the conversations you have with somebody who's 20 years older or younger than you, they have a very different perspective based on their lived experience, which goes back to diversity again. So I think that I don't know all the answers. And anybody who's on your show or any other show saying like, here's what's going to happen and here's how I don't know. And part of the reason is because I'm old. But I can tell you that I know it's coming, and I know that we need to think differently about how we build our brand experiences, and that we don't resist the change that is inevitable. We're not, Barnes and Noble or Blockbuster. We are evolving. We are Netflix, even as a great example. Like Netflix was a disruptive technology that came around and disrupted Blockbuster. But then when streaming started, they became a leader in streaming. Like they have evolved as the technology and culture has evolved.
And the juxtaposition of that is somebody like, let's say, Redbox, which was disruptive in the same space, but they didn't adopt the streaming piece at the same pace. And, I think I saw a Redbox outside of McDonald's the other day. So I think there's still
like Redbox too.
But okay, break down real quick for us before you got to go. AFrame Brands. Who are the owners, and I specifically use that term owners, and tell us the structure, the brands, why.
Yeah. So AFrame has its portfolio. We have 3 brands currently. 2 of those brands are in market and scaling right now. So we've set up our platform to have a templatized approach to partnership, true partnership. We feel like it's very important that when we partner with somebody who is going to be our co-founder on a brand, that they're notable from the community we're serving, and they have a high level of trust and engagement with the community. And we want to empower them with an equal share of the business. That is not just about equity, which is always the first thing you go to, but it also means they have board seats, so that they're represented in every way and that they are required for decision making.
And so for people to understand, I just want to double down on that. There's a difference from a standpoint of doing a deal with a celebrity as a branding deal. So the celebrity is out front, there's pictures of them using the product, and they're saying, hey, this is a brand. In those types of deals, celebrities get a check to represent a brand, but they're not owners of the company by and large. In this case, it's almost like, when a team hires a player to play, the owner still owns the team, right? In this case, what Ari, you're saying is that you're doing a partnership deal with the celebrity so that they literally are owners of the brand.
Yeah, we believe philosophically, that we should just be partners with our co-founding partners, using that word repeatedly and walking the walk. But also the most wealth is going to be created by building equity together and then exiting the brand, selling the brand. For a celebrity to get an endorsement deal where they put their face on the product or hold it up in a picture and get paid 7 figures to do that, that's easy work. But consumers increasingly see through that, and ultimately it's just a check, and it's temporary. Whereas building equity is something that can really build generational wealth. We also want to make sure that there's equity held by every one of our employees. And as I mentioned earlier, given we're 95% diverse, a lot of our employees have never had equity in the companies that they've worked for. Every single employee has equity. That's fundamental to what we do. That is, it just goes back to the notion that in order to create the most generational wealth, you need to have ownership, and you need to be rewarded for the work you do from the results that they bear. And the best place for you to do that is through ownership of the company. You also want to pay competitive salaries to employees. You want to give great benefits, and we do all that. For the talent themselves, though, a lot of the deals that they get presented are, it's a minimum guarantee, or it's an upfront, or it's some revenue share. we load everything and focus everything on creating equity together. And that just has a different incentive for all of us.
So I'm very proud to say I'm on the board of a company called Kinlow, which is an AFrame brand owned and led by Naomi Osaka. Could you talk about Kinlow?
Yes, Kinlow is a brand that we developed in partnership with Naomi. The brand is really meant to be a sun care brand for those with melanin-rich skin. The stats that we learned about as we dug into kind of what was going on with some of the opportunities in the sun care industry were that Black and brown communities tend to use sunscreen at a very low rate. There's a couple of reasons for that. Most notably, that there's some miseducation or misunderstanding in those communities around like whether or not it's even needed based on the melanin that already exists in your skin. The answer is yes, it is. But second, it's also lack of product availability specifically formulated to be harmonious with your skin. The industry is generally, I would say that it's designed by and for, those with white skin, and 40% of the population is essentially being left behind. We're seeing a little bit more in the way of brands developing products for those that might have more melanin in their skin, but it's still somewhat limited, and it's still a very small subset of the brands out there.
And it's a massive business, right? How big is the sun care industry? How big is it?
About $12 billion a year goes into sun care globally, and top brands are doing hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and so it's a genuinely big industry. Yet 40% of the population is essentially being left behind in the U.S. and 70% globally. So we do think that this is a big opportunity. The other stat I'll give you, which I think was kind of heart-stopping for us, was the 5-year mortality rate for melanoma in the Black community is about 33%. So, we're talking about roughly, 3.5, 4x the death rate. Now, melanoma happens a little bit less frequently in Black community, but when it happens, it's tragic and it's unnecessary because a lot of it is late detection. So being able to use a daily regimen of SPF is actually it's a public health need. So Naomi's been great, something that is near and dear to her heart because she plays tennis outdoors. She experienced getting sunburn for her first time when she was 19 or 20, and so this is something that she realized, I really actually should be using these products. So we developed these with her, with a dermatologist of color who's amazing. So we really try to make sure that we are developing efficacious product that is going to be helpful to your day-to-day health and well-being.
And we're going to have to do a part 2, Ari, because we didn't even get into the idea of you're launching these companies both at simultaneously with big stores, Walmart as an example for Kinlow, where folks can find it, as well as direct to consumer, so folks can purchase it online. And so you're marrying the tech with that in-store experience with the brand you're talking about. And could you break down the other two currently publicly discussed AFrame brands?
Yeah, so Proudly is our second brand. It is currently available at proudly.com. It is a baby care product. We say baby and bum care, but it's skincare, diapers, and wipes, and it's designed specifically for kids under 5 that have more melanin in their skin. Again, it's over 50% of the population. There actually are not brands out there explicitly dedicated just to families of color, and so we'll be launching with a major retailer in about a month from now. Very excited about that. It's going to be available nationwide, and it's done in partnership with Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade. Their family is an amazing family. They are amazing people. This is something that's really important to them, and we love working with them. They've been just an amazing partner, and we're excited to bring that one to market. And yeah, it's going to be just a massive brand that we know from even the web being live and the website being live now, and what we're hearing from customers, just a lot of really beautiful messaging around. We've been waiting for a product like this. We found that actually a lot of Pam, who is the president of Proudly, did a lot of research early on, and a lot of folks were actually buying products for their kids in the adult aisles because they didn't exist for kids with melanin in their skin. And so just the fact that we're making products specifically for kids who are now the majority of the population, I think people have had a really strong and positive response to it. And then lastly, we have a brand that has not been named yet that is going to be with John Legend. And it's a day-to-day skincare brand that he'll know very well. and John's been an amazing partner, but we're really trying to focus in on specific needs for adults with more melanin in their skin, specifically around pH balance and moisture loss. One of the things that is not widely known is just that if you have more melanin in your skin, you can actually lose moisture at about up to 2 times faster. And that's a big problem. I think a lot of people read that and think about just dry skin, but that actually leads to a lot of other issues that can lead to fungal infections. It can lead to eczema. It can lead to a host of other problems that our dermatologist is much more qualified to talk about. But we're actually seeking to develop products that are rejuvenating to melanin-rich skin. And John's very passionate about this. He's been really trying to find the right way to get into this industry for a while. And I think we just all felt really good when we met each other. And he's such a lovely, smart guy, and his team is amazing. And we're just really excited to be working with him.
He's great. That's incredible. And so, you know, Denzel Washington famously said, King Kong ain't got nothing on me. I'm going to tell you this, with all those brands, those are all massive individual businesses, but you got 3 and more coming. I'm going to say this, Elon Musk ain't got nothing on Ari Bloom. He's, you know, you're doing more, bigger, better, smarter. I love it. And lastly,
I just stay off of Twitter, and then I'll be okay.
This is 5-factor authentication. If you can narrow it down to just 5, what are your 5 most important factors to living a full life online and offline in our tech-driven world? What would you say those 5 factors would be?
Number 1 is balance. I think that we need balance in everything that we do and moderation in everything we do. We don't want to be addicted or consumed by anything. So I think balance is like the number 1 rule for anyone and anything. Common sense, number 2, we talked about earlier. I think not being impulsive about what we share, what we say. I think that technology has enabled us to not look people in the eyes when we talk to them sometimes. And that is a really, I think, destructive change in the way that we interact with each other. So I think that that's number 2. Related to that, I would say we have to assume best intentions of everybody. And I think that that is impacting how we interact with folks in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our country. I think we're at a time when we're very divided, in this country especially, but even globally. And I think fundamentally most people are good. I think that experiences can impact them to do bad things, or do things that they don't know are bad or impacting people negatively. So I think just being able to assume good intentions of everybody as a start is a good one. I think rest and recovery, I'll go back to that. I think that we, because of our current culture, because we're sitting in our rooms on Zoom all day long, many of us, we don't take breaks. So I think having some time to do something that is not sitting in front of a computer, and if you're taking a break, not to sit in front of a computer with your break, to do something else, to get up and have that thing. I've been a musician all my life. I always turn to that. You know, sports is great for people, but whatever it is that's your passion outside, I think maintaining that is much harder as you go through life. So rest and rejuvenation, and then purpose. Lastly, I'll just say, like, being able to identify what's important to you and make sure that you remain true to that in everything that you do. It's easy to say, this is important to me, but I only do it in one aspect of my life. These are my values, but like, I'll put those aside for this. That's not okay. I think you got to live it every day, all day long. And that purpose you just can't lose that purpose. Those are my 5 things.
That's awesome. You know, Ari Bloom, I consider you a brother. You're my friend. I have so much respect for you. I think that a lot of folks listening to this are going to be inspired just like I am every time I talk to you. So from you, 5-factor authentication, Ari Bloom, you've officially been authenticated. You're incredible. And thank you. Just thank you for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it. And it's a
Thank you for having me. The feeling is very mutual, my friend. Thank you. Likewise.
Do you ever feel like advertisements are following you? From web pages to your social media feeds, and maybe even as commercials on your favorite streaming platforms. You're not alone. You're being tracked. We all are. Learn more from our friends at Norton on the what, why, and how of internet tracking. Plus, tips to cover your digital tracks at 5factorauthentication.com.
Here are my 5-factor action items for my conversation with Ari Bloom. Factor 1, look for diverse voices. You got to hire diversity. You need different people in your life giving you advice. Factor 2, every business is a tech business. Every person is a techie. Your life is run by technology, so learn it, understand it, and use it and embrace it. Factor 3, know that you can build a business no matter who you are. You can launch a company. You are an entrepreneur, and you can do it through technology. Factor 4, you got to protect yourself when it comes to tech. So use a tool to make sure you're protecting yourself. Keep your devices updated and keep everything moving forward, and use someone to help you protect yourself online for sure. And finally, Factor 5, don't be afraid to start. You got to begin. Share this with anybody you think is an entrepreneur or hasn't started where you think they should have a business. Share this podcast. Encourage them. Encourage each and every person in your life to grow and build their own business. We are all entrepreneurs, and every company is a tech company. That's my 5-factor takeaways from my conversation with Ari Bloom. I'm Hill Harper, and thanks for listening to 5 Factor. Make sure you subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you catch your podcasts. And follow us on Instagram at 5 Factor Podcast. 5 Factor is brought to you by Norton and produced and distributed by kglobal in partnership with Spaceman World Media. Norton empowers people and families around the world to feel safer in their digital lives. So you worry less about the darkness of cybercrime. Whether it's protection for your devices, online privacy, identity, or everything all in one, Norton makes it easier to keep your digital life safer. Opt in to cyber safety.